Hey everyone, and welcome to our first actual proper episode on our Necromunda series. Before we get started, we're going to have a couple of different series of videos going on around this. Like today, we're going to have lore and history videos, and then we're also going to have gameplay, how to build a gang, going to have some guests on to talk about their experiences with Necromunda, and maybe we'll make some things together, like our own type of gang, or make up some rules or etc. like that. Maybe how we can make a TTRPG version of Necromunda? I don't know, something along those lines. And so this week we're going to be starting off with what is Necromunda? How did it come to be? Starting off as a series of articles in the early 90s of White Dwarf Magazine and growing into the really popular skirmish game that we know and love today. So really that's the best place to start, is the early 90s. Now, a few years earlier, in the late 80s, Games Workshop had just released Rogue Trader, the original first edition of what would become Warhammer 40k that we all know and love. Now, that was a massive success, and it really cemented them as not just a fantasy outlet offering Dungeons & Dragons supplements and war games therein, it was something completely new and different, which can only be described as a particularly British and very 80s view of what the cyberpunk future we will have will be. You know, they had this super bloated Brazil-like bureaucracy which held up this extremely fascist, and yes, they are the bad guys, Imperium, that sent out their super soldier space marines to go fight the beings of chaos, which are these powers from a parallel dimension called the Warp, which was born of the emotional power and energy of our own universe. It's insane. Which, if you know your D&D lore, it's a little bit like the Abyss mixed with the Feywild, I guess. And then also to go and fight all the other alien races they could find in the universe. Now, in the early days, it was just a port of the fantasy setting, and as such, it was really your esoteric space elves, your football hooligan-inspired space orcs, and your biker gang engineering space dwarves, as well as space frogs, etc, etc. But anyway, within this new world, they developed loads of little mini-games through White Dwarf, but one in particular that we want to be talking about today is Confrontation. Initially released as a series of White Dwarf Magazine articles in late 1990 and early 1991. And it had quite a different feel to it. Actually, you could say a bit of a D&D-like feel to it, with this very narrative progression through a campaign-based story mode, party progression through gang upgrades and gaining XP for your members and being able for them to die and have moments between campaigns, as well as an initiative turn-based combat. And all of this game was set on the desolate hive world of Necromunda. So what is a hive world? Well, Necromunda, like many other hive worlds of the Imperium, are desolate planets that have been stripped and mined of their resources through millennia of industrial activity, where humanity is forced to live in what can only best be described as infinitely large termite mounds called hive cities. These hive cities then house billions of people within its pyramidal structure, ranging from the deepest hive base where mutants roam amongst the toxic waste, to the underhive where proxy wars are fought in aid of the main hive above, where the masses work in vast industrial complexes to churn out weapons to feed the Imperium man and their endless war of the 41st millennium. And above all this, and its toxic fumes and radiated wastes, are the lofty spires, where the high houses and the Lord Protector Helmor rule the city below. The land between these hives is pretty much a post-apocalyptic Mad Max-inspired wasteland, where nomadic tribes fight each other over the most scarce resources, all the whilst trying to stave off attacks from things like ripperjacks, which are pretty much manta rays mixed with facehuggers. I mean, how cool is this game? So back to Confrontation. This is what set us up with the bases of these hive cities and presented them as these battlegrounds for rival gangs who are each vying for power, territory and gear to control different resources and industry, all in the aid of their high lords above. And back in those days, they were given more generic names for their gangs and not as detailed as they are today. So we had brat gangs, clan gangs and scabby gangs. And that's not all. Amongst this back and forth of the gangs and their houses, there were chaos cultists, religious zealots, corrupt law enforcement, rich kids on murder sprees, alien spawn, and everything else in between in this grim dark universe that wants to exact its will on the system. So how does the player fit in? Well, in both Necromunda and Confrontation, you take on the role of a gang leader building your gang. You equip each of them with their own gear and tech, and in the old system of Confrontation it was through random rolling tables, but in the new game you have a monetary value called creds, which allows you to apportion different rule sets to each gang member. There are loads of other more complicated systems into that, and we will deal with those in a later video. So once you have your gang made, you would then put them into a campaign. Now, in the Confrontation system, there weren't any modules. In the new ones, there definitely are, and they're great. But you could just make one up by tying together a series of missions that you might have found in the White Dwarf articles, or as you can find in the books these days. And each of those could be just like a capture the VIP, or capture territory, or capture the flag. There's a lot of capturing going on here. Anyway, each game your gang would gain XP, and each of the little members would gain particular XP points for doing certain things, and it makes them so individual because one of those characters might be the one who does the snipe right at the last minute to get the VIP, or rallies from being down for 3 rounds and suddenly takes out the Hive boss. You know, it's really incredible. And then when they get captured or injured or hurt or worse, die, it's heartbreaking because they have names. You know, it's so much more engaging and so much more human than the sort of squads of 40k, and that's what makes it so much fun. Oh my gosh, it's such a great game. So that was Confrontation. It wasn't supported with like a big box set, but it did have boxes of gangs that did have replaceable arms so you could upgrade them, but they didn't have the same names as the gangs that were in the articles. But anyway, it was fine and it worked really well. But then it wasn't until issue 190 of White Dwarf, October 95, where they presented to us Necromunda, the game. Oh, the terrain on the back of this is incredible, and as I said in the last video, I read that back to back thousands of times. And this new Necromunda came with a much more considered lore and a complete list of gangs, each with their own playstyle based on different skills and abilities. This edition did actually come with a box set. It included 2 gangs, the ORLOCKS and the Goliath. It also had a source book, which is like a lore book, as well as a rule book. It had a painting guide, and as well, that amazing terrain and funky little templates. And that was not all. Even at this initial release, they also promoted an Outlands expansion, which would take us out into the Ash Wastes and meet the Nomads. And as I said, the system was pretty much the same as it was before, but just way more refined. The gangs each came with their own box set. They had 2 body types with reposable arms that could be upgraded as your gang gained experience. And if you were fancy, you used magnets or pins, and if you were me, you just chopped the arms off and stuck the new ones on. So, who were these gangs? They pretty much haven't changed throughout the years. There are some that have been lost and more that have been added, but there was an initial set that came with the original setting of Necromunda, so I thought maybe it's worth just having a brief overview of what they were. First up, we've got the Goliaths. Now, these are your classic brutes. Their history is they run the forges and furnaces of the Hive. They take the raw materials given to them by the Orlock gang who run the mines in the Ash Wastes, and they weld them into powerful weaponry and armor. Now, they're your classic tanks. They use their brute strength and durability to just dominate the battlefield, and so therefore their playstyle is pretty much full frontal attack. However, as they have bred themselves into these huge hulking shapes that are sometimes compared to space marines, and they are a little bit too big of fans of the stims that you can get from the ESHERS gang, they have been afflicted by quite short lifespans and some mental instability, so there is some sort of barbarian rage function going on here as well. Next up are the Orlocks. These are basically taken from a cheesy 80s gang music video. I'm just thinking of like Bad or something like that, because they are denim clad, everyday blue collar workers. Now, they do have a history of owning all the mines, and through what basically can be described as gumption or sort of us against them mentality, they sort of find themselves punching above their own weight, because without the natural resilience of the Nomads in the Ash Waste and the hulking bruteness of the Goliaths, they rely on sturdy weaponry and rugged vehicles to make sure that they can get through any situation. And that's sort of how their playstyle is, and the more sort of standard model of gameplay, and very good like entry gang if you want to get into the game. And next up are the ESHERS. Now, these are my favourite. They're the ones I'm making a gang for at the moment. Now, they're an all-female led gang. Their history is they run the chem labs of the Hive, which make not only stimulants but also poisons, and with that they gain special weaponry like chem throwers, needle guns, and poisonous claws and really, really cool effects. They are very agile, they're very dexterous, and they can get right in the mix as well as being quite area of effect attack. So if you want a more dynamic playstyle, they're a great one to get involved with. Next up are the Vansar. Now these are your most cyber of the cyberpunks. They are the wealthy technocrats of the Hive as well as the weapon masters, and this is because they have access to what is called an STC. I'm actually not 100% sure if it is that, but they've got access to ancient technology that delivers them really advanced armor and weaponry, and therefore they are very deadly. However, as with everything, there is a curse that has befallen them by using this technology, and it means that due to their very incestuous royal-like bloodline, they have been afflicted by a wasting disease. Now the ESHERS are helping them to stay alive through the chemical stimulants that they make, but this, together with their weaponry, makes them very much the sort of glass cannons of the game, because they have really high-powered weaponry, but they cannot take much damage. However, their armor does sort of compensate for it, but they are very expensive. So I'd say it's a more advanced gang to run because it's more about balancing that mechanic, but they can be really, really fun, and their long-range game is actually really interesting. Next up are the Delac, which are basically goth punks mixed with psychic powers, which is pretty cool. They are the sort of espionage, secretive, stealthy gang. They have things like smoke bombs and cloaking devices, and it allows you to play a very considered game. They do say that if you're going to play this, you have to really think of all angles because you've really got to play to the advantage of the gang to win, but it is so much fun. So if you're really into that more Metal Gear Solid, much more stealthy mode of play, they are absolutely awesome. And the psychic powers additional, pretty cool. Right, now the Cawdor. They are your religious zealots. They believe that the imperial truth, which is that the Emperor is a god of mankind and should be worshipped such. And due to this, and due to a lack of funds, they assume most of technology, and so their armor is like cloth and wool. And because they kind of go around the Hive picking up scraps to make improvised weapons, they have really cool things like flamethrowers, Molotov cocktails, as well as rats to carry their made-up bombs. They look really cool. So a really fun one if you want to do something very, very 40k. Talking of controversial gangs, there was also the Ratskins, which I think were basically trying to be a port of the Skaven. They are the scavengers and hunters of the underbelly of the Hive. They use traps and primitive weapons to attack their foes, and they are adept at moving through the sewers and the tunnels of the Hive to get to where they need to go. Next up then are the Spirers. They're the rich kid brats who take mummy and daddy's money, buy the most high-tech military gear, and take a jaunt down into the Hive to basically go on a murder spree. Very Hunger Games, a pretty awful gang. However, they had some really cool models, so worth using the models again for other gangs, but maybe not a cool gang to play. And finally, the Nomads. This terrifying band of warriors call the radiated ash waste between the Hive cities of Necromunda home. They're able to survive the toxic clouds without succumbing to it, and they're able to manipulate and utilize this atmosphere and the terrain to basically seemingly appear out of nowhere and ambush a set of poor Orlocks trying to get their mining gear from one mine to a Hive world somewhere over here. And on top of this, they have really cool alien mounts that you can use and really cool vehicles. So basically a really fun, different gang to use. So that's the setting, how it came to be, and what your gangs are. Now, this first system was supported for a while, and at the same time, they made a load of other really cool skirmish games, like the very well-loved Mordheim, which I don't know why they haven't brought back yet, as well as the really cool Chaos Fuel, orc-infested battle zone called Gorka Morka. Absolutely love that. We probably have to look at both of these at some point. Then there was a second edition of Necromunda that came out in 2003. This box set repackaged everything, took the two books and mushed them together, gave you a new set of models, and pretty much that was it for a very long time. They did do a living rulebook that was updated regularly on the website, but it really wasn't until 2017 when they re-released it under the name Necromunda Underhive. This time coming with the ESHERS and Goliaths in the box set. And in classic GW fashion, it released its rules and rule sets in the craziest way. Sometimes books coming out, there was little supplements called Gang War that delivered the rules for all the other gangs, as well as the Delacs, I think, came in a White Dwarf article. I mean, Like, they really don't make it easy for us, do they? I mean, on top of that, if you want to even find Necromunda on their website, you have to go to something called Boxed Sets and then click on Necromunda. It's not even on the main tab. I mean, UX be damned. And then there was a new box set in 2018 called Dark Uprising. This came with the Enforcers, a very Judge Dredd-like police force, against the corpse grinders, who basically go up and grind meat out of the dead bodies of the Hive and turn it into pretty much Soylent Green. It was a really cool game box set, and it came with some really awesome terrain. Then there was a reprinting of the rules, and then each of the gangs got a book under the title of the Houses of, so Houses of Blades, Houses of Chains, and then Forge World started bringing out other minis, so you can go on there and get hangers on as well as specialist items, and there were upgrade sprues and all that other great stuff. So it just grew and grew and grew in the very GW way, as I said before. Lots of disparate ways of finding out the information, hence why I was so confused at the beginning. So anyway, that leads us basically to today. So that is Necromunda, the history of Necromunda, how it started as a very simple set of rules under the name Confrontation in White Dwarf in the early 90s to now, where it's this very complex, intricate game of gangs vying for power in the Underhives. Next time you join us, we'll be looking at the history of Necromunda the planet, how it came to be, because it's actually got quite an interesting and particular different story to the simple it was mined of resources become an ash waste. There are some very 40k reasons why it is the way it is. However, if you want to break from the lore, we will be doing a series of gameplay videos talking about how it actually runs, how it's been adapted over the time, and what you need to know going into a game of Necromunda. We will then be looking at each of the gangs individually from a gameplay perspective and how each of them might adapt and play to different playstyles and what may suit your actual player preference. If you want to join us on this journey, again, as ever, press the like button, press the subscribe button, click the little bell to get a notification, and I can't wait to see you next time in the Underhive. You take care, everyone. Bye.